has been warning Denmark for about 20 years now, longer than that, 25 years. They've been warning Denmark about the Russian threat. And it's not only Russia, it's also China.
Europe is entering a period of political uncertainty marked by rising tension with the United States, growing pressure inside the European Union, and the re-emergence of strong nationalist leadership across several key countries. In recent weeks, these pressures have converged around three influential figures: US President Donald Trump, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Together, their actions and rhetoric are reshaping Europe's political landscape at a time when unity and stability are already under strain. The most immediate source of tension has come from Washington. President Donald Trump has sharply escalated his approach toward Europe, particularly over trade and security issues tied to the Arctic and NATO. In early January, Trump openly threatened to impose tariffs on several European countries following their opposition to his renewed push for American control over Greenland. The proposal, which revived a controversial idea from his earlier presidency, was framed by Trump as a national security necessity. European leaders, however, viewed it as an aggressive and unilateral move that undermines diplomatic norms. The tariff threats target multiple European economies and could begin at 10% before increasing significantly later in the year. Leaders in Denmark, Germany, France, and other affected nations have responded with unusually direct criticism, accusing the White House of using economic pressure to force political concessions. Behind closed doors, European officials worry that this dispute could spiral into a broader trade conflict at a time when global growth is already fragile and supply chains remain vulnerable. Brussels has not remained silent. The European Union is actively considering retaliation through its anti-coercion mechanism, a legal tool designed to respond to economic intimidation from foreign powers. If enacted, it would mark a major shift in how Europe deals with the United States, moving away from de-escalation and toward direct confrontation. Senior EU diplomats have emphasized that this is not Europe's preferred path, but insist that credibility and sovereignty must be defended. Beyond trade, Trump's posture has reignited fears about the future of NATO. European leaders are increasingly concerned that Washington's transactional approach to alliances could weaken collective security. Trump has repeatedly criticized European defense spending and suggested that US protection should not be guaranteed without greater financial contributions. While these arguments resonate with parts of the American electorate, they have unsettled European governments that rely heavily on NATO coordination, especially amid ongoing tensions with Russia. Trump's influence is not limited to policy disputes. His return to power has energized nationalist and populist movements across Europe, many of which see him as a symbol of resistance to liberal institutions and elite governance. In several countries, right-wing parties have echoed his language on immigration, national sovereignty, and cultural identity. At the same time, his confrontational style has deepened divisions within Europe itself, exposing fractures between governments that favor strong ties with Washington and those that prioritize strategic autonomy. Hungary sits at the center of this divide. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has long positioned himself as a challenger to Brussels, promoting what he calls an illiberal model of democracy. Orban has praised Trump's leadership style in the past and shares many of his views on migration, national identity, and skepticism toward global institutions. As Hungary approaches a critical parliamentary election scheduled for April 2026, Orban is framing the vote as a choice between national independence and foreign interference. This election is the most serious test Orban has faced in more than a decade. For the first time in years, a unified opposition appears capable of defeating his Fidesz party. The new opposition movement, led by former insider Peter Magyar, has gained momentum by combining anti-corruption messaging with a promise to restore Hungary's standing within the European Union. Polls suggest a tight race, reflecting widespread public frustration over inflation, stagnant wages, and frozen EU funds. Orban has responded by intensifying his rhetoric. He argues that Brussels is deliberately undermining Hungary by withholding financial support and imposing ideological standards that conflict with national values. He has also warned that a change in government would weaken Hungary's ability to resist migration and foreign influence. In speeches, Orban presents himself as a defender of Christian Europe, drawing sharp contrasts between his vision and what he describes as Western Europe's moral decline. Internationally, Orban continues to walk a delicate line. He remains one of the few European leaders willing to maintain close ties with Moscow, particularly on energy issues. He has also been critical of military support for Ukraine, aligning more closely with Trump's calls for a negotiated settlement rather than prolonged conflict. This position has isolated Hungary within the EU but strengthened Orban's image among voters who fear the economic costs of war. Italy's Giorgia Meloni represents a different, more cautious form of nationalism. Since taking office, Meloni has worked to reassure international partners while staying true to her conservative base. She has avoided direct confrontation with Brussels and has supported Ukraine, even as some members of her coalition express skepticism about continued military aid. Her approach reflects an effort to balance ideology with pragmatism. Meloni has been careful in her dealings with Trump. While she shares some of his views on immigration and border control, she has avoided endorsing his more controversial positions. Publicly, she insists that Italy does not need to choose between the United States and the European Union. Privately, her government is focused on preserving Italy's access to EU funds and maintaining stability in financial markets. At home, Meloni faces mounting pressure over economic issues. Italy's growth remains sluggish, public debt is high, and living costs continue to rise. Her government has promised tax relief and support for families, but progress has been slow. Opposition parties accuse her of prioritizing ideology over practical solutions, while business leaders warn that political uncertainty could deter investment. Meloni's leadership is closely watched across Europe because it offers a possible template for right-wing governance that does not alienate allies. Unlike Orban, she has avoided direct clashes with EU institutions. Unlike Trump, she has refrained from personal attacks and dramatic ultimatums. This positioning has earned her a degree of respect in Brussels, even among those who disagree with her politics. Still, Meloni's balancing act is becoming more difficult as global tensions rise. Trump's aggressive stance toward Europe forces leaders like her to clarify their positions. Supporting US pressure risks alienating European partners, while opposing it could strain relations with Washington. For Italy, a country heavily dependent on exports and foreign investment, the stakes are especially high. In addition to political and economic pressures, Europe is also confronting internal debates about energy security, migration, and climate policy. Hungary, Italy, and other member states have adopted divergent approaches, challenging the EU's ability to coordinate unified responses. Orban's energy deals with Russia and Italy's cautious stance on military aid to Ukraine highlight the growing divergence in national priorities. These differences are amplified by populist rhetoric, which often frames EU oversight as an attack on national sovereignty. Public opinion in Europe is increasingly polarized. Surveys indicate that voters support strong national leadership but are wary of destabilizing economic policies or escalating international tensions. Young voters, urban populations, and business communities often clash with nationalist constituencies, creating complex political environments for leaders like Orban and Meloni. Meanwhile, Trump's rhetoric has intensified media coverage and public debate, with European news outlets analyzing both the domestic and international implications of US policies. As the months ahead unfold, the direction Europe takes will depend on a series of political tests. Hungary's election could determine whether one of the EU's most outspoken critics retains power. Trade disputes with Washington could escalate into a wider economic confrontation. Italy's experiment with pragmatic nationalism could either stabilize or unravel under external pressure. Additional developments, such as potential new EU sanctions on Russia, debates over defense spending, and ongoing economic uncertainties, will all intersect with these leadership decisions. What is clear is that Europe is no longer reacting to distant events. The decisions of Trump, Orban, and Meloni are directly shaping the continent's future. Whether this leads to fragmentation or renewed cooperation remains uncertain. For now, Europe stands at a crossroads, navigating between old alliances, emerging rivalries, and the growing influence of leaders who challenge the status quo. Citizens across the continent are watching closely, aware that the outcomes of these political struggles will influence everything from economic stability to security alliances for years to come, marking one of the most consequential moments in contemporary European history.